Hi, welcome, and thank you for tuning in. This is Maura Kelly with our February version of PLP Pathways. I am a 7th and 8th grade humanities teacher at People's Academy Middle Level in Morrisville, Vermont. And if our other two guests could introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Kevin Hunt. I'm at Wilson Central School. I'm a 5'8" generalist.
I'm Allison Gothier. I teach high school science at U32 in East Montpelier.
And so before we begin, we just wanted to talk about some of the professional development opportunities and thank the Tarrant Institute for Middle Level Education and the Middle Grades Collaborative for hosting these monthly conversations about PLPs in Vermont. Coming up this spring, there is the VAMLY conference March 15th at Champlain College. It's the Beyond Bullying, Creating a Culture of Respect in Learning Communities. And it's a great day full of youth-led workshops addressing school climate, and students are making an action research plan to take back to their school. And it really talks a lot about leadership opportunities that students can really partake in their schools. And then we also have the Middle Grades Institute coming up on June 24th at Champlain College. So mark your calendars. And it's a great opportunity. It's wonderful to go either as an individual or a team and really work on a lot of things we're talking about on the webinar. So before we get in, where is everyone on their PLPs?
I can jump in. We're halfway through our second trimester, and our students are still, we have weekly time embedded in our schedule. So every Wednesday, they just work on adding new evidence to their goals. Each student has 5 goals, one for each of the transferable skills that we they decide and they choose at their Hopes and Dreams conference in the beginning of the year. So we're still chipping away at that. And every week they do this quick goal reflections on each goal and talk about what they've done for that week to work on the goal and what their next steps are. More recently, we've been trying to be more transparent and just purposeful about embedding the PLPs into our curriculum a bit more. So every time we start a unit now, we give them a question on Google Classroom, a form of a question that you can do on Google Classroom, and we ask them to choose 2 of their PLP goals that they would like to work on. So then that's out there on Google Classroom. We can see it as a teacher, and then halfway through the unit, we just ask them to do a quick reflection on how they've been working on that, just to draw those more explicit connections between what they're doing in class to find the evidence for their PLP goals and their PLP. So it's been so far so good. Again, it's a little bit of a shift for us that we wanted to try out, but it's been working out pretty well.
Do you think that do you think that it's engaged students who previously, when you've asked them to reflect, who might not have been totally engaged in reflecting about their goals, has it made it more authentic to them? Have you seen any difference in their attitude towards reflections and viewing their own growth?
Yeah, it's definitely hit a little bit more. Like we're reaching out to a handful of kids who it's making it more authentic. One thing that it's this PLP system has been embedded into our culture since day one of Swift House. So it's just part of what we do already. But what it does is it reminds them more on a daily basis that all this good work they're doing in class can find a place on their PLP. And I think that's what's good. So instead of them waiting for their weekly time on PLP to like look back and think about what class did I do this in, it's more upfront and available to them. So when they're starting a unit, they're engaging in the thought of what am I doing in this unit to provide evidence toward one of my PLP goals versus waiting for a unit to finish and then thinking back to what they did and if they did anything. So it's just be a little more proactive about the approach, which I think has been more authentic and is getting a little bit more engagement from our students.
Yeah, Kevin, can you say one of the example questions that you put on Google Classroom? I'm just curious as to how like metacognitive it is or like surface level the questions are.
Yeah, so literally we will just post a question saying, choose 2 of your PLP goals that you would like to focus on during this unit. And what's great we did it as a question format instead of like a Google form or instead of a document, because when you post a question on Google Classroom, what's nice is from the teacher viewpoint, you can just scroll through and see everybody's at once. We don't have to open up document. And then if they want to change it, it's a little easier as well. Plus at the end, or halfway through the trimester, you can just use that little function where you move it to the top. So we can say, move that question back to the top and say, okay, remember we had this question. Now reflect on how have you been working on your PLP. So we'll just pose another question. How have you been working on these 2 goals that you wrote in this question, or, your 2 PLP goals? And what are the next steps you need? What resources are going to help you to continue to work on it? So that's as metacognitive as it gets. It's just pretty straightforward. What 2 goals do you want to work on? And then a couple weeks into the unit, depending on how long the unit is, it's going to vary between math, social studies, ELA, science. We'll just check in and say, what have you done? If you haven't thought about it, how come? What can we give you? What adult can support you? What resources can support you in making progress on that goal?
Do you also find that kids seem to choose, you said there are 5 transferable skills?
Yep.
Do you find that kids will choose the same one over and over, or they're pretty good about selecting one of each?
No, so when we set up our Hopes and Dreams conference, we literally have them pick a goal for each transferable skill. So they'll have a clear and effective communication goal. They'll have a creative and practical problem solving goal. They'll have informed and integrative thinking, citizenship, and self-direction. So they have to have a goal within each of those. Now, that's going to be different for each kid. We're really flexible. So if some students need more of that, kind of self-direction feel type goals, about time management or not blurting out in class, we'll be, and we can find connections, for communication, maybe being good with communication that comes with listening. So you're not blurting out as much, but that can still be tied into self-direction. So we're really flexible. And again, it stems from the kids and what they feel like their strengths are that they want to build on and what their challenges are. But yeah, we do have, so the way our PLP site is set up, our tabs are each of the transferable skills. So they'll have clear and effective communication. Then they'll write their goal, which is in I can language. And then they provide evidence for that goal for the trimester on that page on their Google sites.
And I would imagine that, being mindful and thoughtful about reflecting both in the content areas and outside of the content areas, because you're hoping that students are doing it in and out of school, it makes it more apparent the transfer between, okay, I'm doing this in all these different places, or, maybe working on this goal looked one way in math class, and then when I was in dance class, it looked totally different, or whatever it is. And so I think the intentionality of that is really nice.
Absolutely.
Hi, Don.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
A little stressed out, and I'm not sure why. Anyway, yeah, a little tech stress. How's everybody doing out there?
Good.
Great.
What were you guys talking about? Catch me up.
So Kevin was talking about how sort of where they're at with the PLP, and talking about intentionally having students reflecting at the beginning, or sort of setting intentional goals for themselves during the beginning of a unit around their PLP goals that they have, and then intentionally having them reflect within the content areas within their units and embedding some of those transferable skills reflections into the content area work.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds good. I don't know if you saw on the agenda that I had, but I've been working in collaboration with, can you still hear me, Maura?
Yes.
Okay, so I've been working in collaboration with our literacy instructor, and one of the things that we just did recently is we were reading a bunch of digital text, and we created a Google form where kids self-assess their understanding of the material. And then what they did is they actually, after they'd done that on 5 or 6 texts, they went back and they looked at the reading strategies they employed, their comments, and then they reflected on that, and then they built a reading goal from that, sort of reflecting on the data that they had collected. And so as Kevin is doing his within his unit, I'm doing mine on some basic sort of, literacy skills, but then I'm having the kids reflect on their own data that they're collecting, and then using that critical, that reflection to then create goals. And so it's kind of neat because you wouldn't think that kids would have that much of a variety between the reading strategies, but they did, and it becomes individualized reflection as well, which I thought was pretty cool. And it turns out that 70% of the kids said that it was pretty helpful to reflect on their reading strategy. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and we just finished that collaboration within the last, I think, this week. So that was kind of good.
Are you planning on having students like continue to try and grow within the reading skill that they identified and set goals around? And what are your sort of future reflective techniques that you're going to use with students?
Well, I think one of the, I'm hopeful that they'll be able to use that reflection to set a goal around reading. Again, that's more teacher directed, so I'm not sure how well that would work. But I think something that's happening right now, and the title of your last blog that's not yet published was about, what do you do in the middle of winter with your PLP?
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things is to start doing multimedia reflections. So podcasts and short videos and little recordings, just short things where kids can start adding that into their repertoire of reflection. And then also having kids not just reflect on what they've done, but starting to reflect on sort of larger issues within the class, like, how far have we come, or what's changed between the beginning of the year, and doing a lot of that. But really, I'm starting to look at some multimedia components right now, kind of to add that into the mix and sort of re-engage and reinvigorate kids.
Allison, what are you guys doing in your class right now around the PLP?
It was interesting hearing Kevin talk about how they're setting goals before, because I think right now we're doing a really good job of, at the end, looking back and reflecting, analyzing, pulling pieces of evidence that support their claim of this sort of growth, but definitely not the proactive steps of goal setting and thinking about what's going to happen before a unit. But thank you, Kevin. I will use that right after February break when after we close our engineering unit. So we're in the middle of a pretty cool climate change, technology, engineering, collaboration unit, which will close out at the end of next week. Student chosen countries, chosen problem, chosen technological solution, and they're collecting data about their prototype, analyzing data, and then they'll have to sell their prototype to investors who are their classmates.
Cool.
So it's going really well. Really good best practices for like middle level collaboration and like how do you build a community. That's where we're at.
For us right now, it's really feeling like we're in the thick of it. And we just finished having all students go through, and we have project time at the end of the day, and going through and really identifying the connection between the goals that they've set for themselves and our transferable skills with our overarching theme of creativity this year. And we've been working really hard on sort of fine-tuning and negotiating with students around other adults that could be mentors and support people within their projects, making sure they have the materials they need, really working on setting up sort of some organizational strategies with the students around keeping track of the evidence. We kind of used it as a speed bump opportunity for students to sort of slow down to speed up. Okay, let's make sure everything is in the right place and lined up. And so we've been busy working on that, and I've been having a lot of conferences with my students. And we also are doing a PLP exposition with the other upper house team at People's Academy, the other 7th and 8th grade team. And this has been a nice way to give our students an authentic audience too. So later in March, when we come back from break, our students are going to be showcasing their PLPs to the other upper house team, as well as a lot of the high school teachers and other teachers in our middle school. And we're hoping to invite some of the lower house students to come and view the PLPs as well, with the focus being around sort of the work that they've been doing in the class to meet the proficiencies, and also around their goal setting and their projects. And so our students will have both evidence of growth and learning towards the proficiencies, the content area proficiencies, and also having a little sort of look behind the curtain, and that's one of Lindsay Hallman's phrases, a look behind the curtain of their projects and where they're at and where they hope to be. So for example, I have a student who's building a weatherproof bike rack for our community here at school. And so that student will be showcasing their blueprints for their building, and they've been working on getting resources. And so that would be something that the student might share. And the hope is that we'll be getting feedback from each other, and students can be partnering. So that's sort of where we're going.
Is that something that came out of your, who came up with that idea? Was that a teacher idea, or the kids wanting to see each other's work?
Kind of both ways, actually. So originally, previously at People's, we've had one 8th grade team. And this is a time of year where we start talking about high school transitions. And now that it's on 2 teams, we were thinking about what are some ways to start thinking about high school transitions and engage all of our students. And so that was one thing that we were trying to solve. And then we also have had students, this is our first year teaching on multi-age teams. So we have 2 teams in the upper house. And so there's a lot of comparison of like, well, in humanities, they're doing this and we're doing that. And so we wanted to give students a way to really talk about their learning and talk about what they're working on in class, because across the upper house, we're working on the same proficiencies. And sometimes we're getting at them in different ways. And so we wanted students to have a opportunity to sort of talk to each other and collaborate with each other and share about their learning and their growth, and sort of really demystify sort of what the other team is doing. And so it kind of came both from the students and from the teachers, and it was our solution to those 2 challenges.
So that's a great segue to my next question, and this goes out to the whole panel. And one of the things that's happening here at Main Street Middle School is we're getting an influx of students, so our population is rising. And so they're bringing on additional staff, and we're trying to figure out what's the best way to structure the middle level experience. And after, it sounds like, Allison, that you've really worked with a negotiated curriculum. It sounds like that's really developing. I know that, Kevin, you have a lot of experience with goals and with conferencing and families. And I know that Maura has a lot of experience with organization and curriculum, et cetera. And the question to you is, if you were going to make recommendations for the structures that you feel are most effective as a middle level educator, or 7 through 9, what would some of those structures be, and what would your recommendations be to people who are looking at teaming and middle level best practices? And all of your responses are very welcome.
I can jump in. The first thing I go to is thinking about relationships, especially with new faces, new students, new teachers. And I think with structures, if you think about within your classroom, how are you structuring those relationships, and how are you fostering those new relationships and building those? So I know as a school at WCS, we've been throwing around the idea of advisories. Most teams use some sort of morning meeting within their homerooms, and that's really effective. So I think to start, if you can have some sort of advisory system in place where you're getting to know your students and your families at more of a personal level, I think everything else branches out from there, because all the work that we're doing, if you look at the 3 pillars of education, none of that happens without a trusting relationship with students and teachers and guardians. So
and Kevin, sorry, how long do you have your kids? Do you have your kids for a year, 2 years? What does that look like?
We have our kids for 4 years, 5 through 8.
And do you think that's been a critical part of your team's success?
110%. Yeah, absolutely. It's for us, to see the growth, to establish a relationship with not only the students, but the families. And we do a lot of whole team things, and it's intentional that we do them like at the beginning of the year when we do overnight campouts where the team comes and the families are invited for a bonfire and things like that. Like, it's not academic per se, but it lends itself to what we do in the classroom. And we wouldn't be able to have the environment and do the things we do with our PLPs without that layer of buy-in from the families, which comes from the relationships we build early on, and that continuity that we have with our students. And I think That was one of the first things when I was actually interning on Swift. Julie Longchamp, who was my mentor teacher, the first thing she said to me was, this job's about relationships, and reflecting on that, everything we do comes from that. So I think structurally, yeah, if you can have something that fosters some sort of advisory, some sort of relationship setting, relationship building, I think it's going to grow from there.
All right, thank you very much. Maura or Allison?
This is our first year really teaching lower house, upper house, teaching 2 grades. And so we have multi-age TAs. We teach straight grades for the content areas. And the idea is that we're looping in the future moving forward. And I think one of the, I know I've looped with students before, and I think going back sort of to what Kevin was saying around Act 77 and the 3 pillars, having those relationships, like I think about my 8th graders that I taught last year as well. And I'm thinking about personalizing their learning, or finding an alternative for them, or helping them meet a goal, or connecting them with a mentor. I know them so much better at the beginning of the year and can really help them in a much different way. And they feel much more comfortable, I think, taking risks and, setting meaningful goals and taking on larger projects, as opposed to sort of the getting to know you. I think about in elementary school, they talk a lot about the first 6 weeks of school. And when you're looping with a student, you kind of are already at the 6th week of school, the first week. And so you're just able to get that much more out of your students because of those relationships that you have. And so I think there are a lot of benefits, but I think transitioning the structure of a school can be really challenging. And we're kind of in that right now here at our school, knowing philosophically the changes that we're making and really believing in them, but also knowing the reality of school transformation and how hard that is on students and teachers and families. And so, yeah, that's sort of my thinking for right now.
Okay, Allison?
I just, the team is new for this year, and I'm a member of it. And I've, like Maura and Kevin, I totally agree with what you're saying about the teacher to student relationship and students to students and building that community. And the more this year progresses, the more I find that the teacher to administrator, or like big picture vision, is just as important as the small details of the day-to-day life. If that, for example, like Team Summit, I know, Don, you put a lot of emphasis in your vision is, the green team, and they're make you the team that you are, with a clear vision, and everyone being on board in that team. I feel it's much more cohesive and strong. I would say, like, having a clear vision, a role, of like goal individually as a student, as like a 9th grade student, but the team that you're on needs to also have this unifying vision, so that you like aren't lost in the day-to-day thing. You have this idea you can come back to as a team.
All right, I mean, that's all really good input. As I mentioned, there's a lot of discussion going on about what's going to happen down the road, and sort of what is the best structure for kids and for the middle level students. So I appreciate your input on that. One of the other things too that I want to mention, and I don't know if have you all had a chance to read the memo that came out of the Agency of Education regarding flexible pathways?
No,
Anybody
I saw it
one?
on the agenda, but I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you haven't seen it, I encourage you, and I'll get people a copy of it, and I'll post it on the website. But it's kind of an interesting discussion about flexible pathways, and I guess I would summarize it. I would have to go back and reread it, but I would summarize it as saying that they're really concerned about equity for flexible pathways, especially at the high school level, where you have kids perhaps going out and maybe even paying for opportunities. If a kid goes out and pays for, say, a computer coding camp once a week, or a kid has an experience that's not available to all of the other students, how are they going to be allowing that in exchange for, traditional curriculum? And I just want to know how you guys are thinking about flexible pathways. And at the middle level, I think for me, flexible pathways is it's just opportunities. Allison mentioned the green team. It's opportunities for kids to show their learning in different, not just in the classroom, but in the school and maybe in the community. And how are people thinking about flexible pathways and about making sure that all of your kids have the same opportunity to explore different options?
I know for us, the biggest piece with the flexible pathways, as you were saying, Don, is just that opportunity to, basically just show your learning in a bunch of different ways. And with me, it's that authentic audience piece as well. I know, Don, you had emailed me about project-based learning, and I think a lot of our flexible pathways and really hitting the three pillars comes from the different project-based lessons that we do on Swift House. And since they're happening on house, I feel like that's how we keep it equitable. We're doing these bigger projects, we're providing the resources, and we most of the time will bring in that authentic audience, whether it's providing a technology resource, so their authentic audience is obviously through the web and out globally that way, or like just recently we had that open house where students did their independent projects, and then community members and family members came through and they were able to present to whoever came into Swift to see what their learning was. So that's I feel like project-based learning for us lends itself to really that authentic learning, that anytime, anywhere type idea of the flexible pathways.
Okay. Allison? Maura?
When I think about the flexible pathways, I'm really thinking about giving students authentic audiences, community partnerships. And one of the things that I really think about, though, and I haven't found the solution for it, but is getting my students ready and having a willingness to find experiences and also accept experiences when they're provided them. And I think a lot about my students who have what I would consider an experience gap. So these would be students, I spend a lot of time over the summer. I work at a camp at school that it's a 21st Century grant that runs it. And we take students on, it's all about, so the philosophy behind the camp is that every student has a sense of belonging at school. And it's all about relationships, cultivating friendships, and also having these new experiences. And I think a lot about students who can live in a community their whole life and not have experiences right here within their community. And these are students who might not want to try new things. They're students who haven't had opportunities to try things that might be out of the box, whether it's horseback riding or going hiking or swimming in the ocean for the first time. And I think it's giving students experiences and opportunities to try new things, and then the opportunity to reflect on it and say, that was actually really fun. I anticipated it. It didn't feel like maybe the right fit for me, but then I tried it and it was really wonderful. Now I have this new passion. And I think at the middle level, it's a lot about giving students opportunities for common experiences and reflecting on it and giving them the confidence to take chances. Because I think about students who we do in 8th grade, you can take online classes. And the students who choose to take the online classes are students a lot of the times, and I'm generalizing here, but whose parents are encouraging them to take the online classes and are supporting them at home. And I think, how can we create a culture where every student feels empowered and have the confidence, if they're ready, to take that next risk? And they might not even know about it because they might not have the family engagement behind it. And so I think I think the equity piece is huge. And I think looking ahead to high school, like a student going to an internship, that's a really big risk for a lot of students if they don't feel comfortable, if they're not being pushed. And so giving students experiences to try new things, opportunities to be pushed in middle school, so that when these larger opportunities come up in high school, they feel ready and also that they have the tools to be successful.
Right. And that's all really good feedback. What I'm going to encourage people to do is to sort of read this memo, just because it has a lot of interesting perspective. In particular, I think, as Maura, you were saying, about the equity and about making sure that all kids have the opportunities. And I've sort of always said, we have a big citizenship component. And it used to be, I would ask kids, well, who's done citizenship activities? And you'd have a few kids who maybe went out on, Vermont Green Up Day, or whose parents would take them to volunteer. And instead, what I've done is, as Kevin mentioned, I've brought that into maybe some of the projects that we're doing, so that kids have the opportunity to work on these different flexible pathways that are going to engage them, but also that we do it as a team. So one example is we partnered with the Fish and Wildlife Service and helped plant trees as part of a stream buffer. And a lot of our kids may not have chosen to do that, but because we all did it together as a team, that provided that equity. And then from the flexible pathways, Kevin also mentioned inviting the community in. And I think that's a huge piece of it too, is having, if you can't get all your kids in front of the community, get the community in front of all of your kids, so that the kids realize maybe the connections between what they're doing in the classroom and some of the opportunities that they have down the road in terms of their education, and also in their internships or even employment down the road. So it's just something to think about. I think you'll probably see more of it, making sure that all kids have the same opportunities, and that it's not just the kids who are the most informed or the most connected, or the most, well-adjusted to the school environment, to make sure that everybody has those types of opportunities. Now, I don't know if you guys talked about this before I got on the call, but what are you all doing in terms of your professional learning, and how are you staying up to speed on what's happening in the field? And do you have any specific resources or learning opportunities that you'd like to mention to our audience?
I can jump in. I think I've mentioned this before. This Twitter's been amazing for me, following the right people, and you start following these trends and certain hashtags, and before you know it, you come across some of these scholarly journals and articles that, just even taking a glance at some of the headings and skimming through it, to start, the light bulbs start going off, and you're able to start making those connections. So that's been a huge thing for me, is that personal learning network really is building who I'm following on Twitter and social media. PLP Pathways, like with the PLP Pathway hashtag, has been amazing to see what you've been posting out. And then we've had resources in our district. The CVU Learns community has been an incredible resource for us, especially as we're moving forward with proficiency-based learning. And I know that's more of our district, but I know they've been doing a lot of standards-based learning, proficiency-based learning throughout the state, which I've been really appreciative for as well.
So just before you jump in, I want to point out that Maura, your district, Lamoille South, also has that road to proficiency. Really good, Kevin. They have it's a really well laid out document about proficiency-based learning. And you mentioned the CVU Learns, and we need to get that up on PLP Pathways, because they have some really good graphics. Yeah. But also this road to proficiency, I think, has been really well done. Maura, what else are you following or paying attention to keep up to speed?
One of the things, and this is sort of as a district, but we have 2 professional development days within like 3 weeks of each other, and they're full day district wide. And so we've been doing a lot of collaboration with Stowe Middle School around our learning skills and our work towards the proficiencies, and collaborating and calibrating some of our work. And it's been really exciting being able to reach out and collaborate with other teachers in the district and also in-house. And so that's been really wonderful. And I would encourage people to reach out and try and keep asking, say, try and form those collaborations either within school or with other teachers who might teach the same subject area, because it is very, very helpful. And then also, I think, the Tarrant Institute puts out their e-blasts and in the emails, and I always find new resources or ideas from teachers. And so I think that comes out twice a week, if not more. And so I find that to be a really helpful resource, seeing as it's right here in Vermont, and it's very applicable to the work that we're doing here within our school.
Okay, Allison, are you still out there?
Yes, I'm here.
What are you doing?
In my dog club.
Go ahead. What are you doing for professional learning?
They send out, I don't think it's weekly, maybe bi-weekly. The Vermont AOE just on what's happening right now in our legislature in terms of education, what's being talked about. Just good to keep up with for when parents and kids hear something down the line. Just knowing what's being discussed. CVU Learns as well is one I often look at. And then what was the other thing I was thinking of? Oh, Eric Mazur often sends out a lot of good stuff about formative assessments, which I'm focusing on this semester for my class. That's been something I've been looking into.
Okay, I'm just thinking to myself, we need a way to accumulate all these resources, and so I'll probably be, I'll send out a doc, and we can start featuring some of these different resources. Some of the one of the things that I've come across a lot recently within the scope of the personalization is the universal design for learning. Mm-hmm. I'm reading a book right now, Personal Learning by Bray. I think is at least one of the authors, and they talk about UDL quite a bit. And so there's a website, cast, I think, .org, mm-hmm. Yep. And they have a ton of resources out there about universal design for learning and some of the ways that you can start structuring, your lesson design to maximize the potential of all the different learners. I'm also, I subscribe to a couple different newsletters. I've mentioned this before about Practical Ed Tech, and then I'll get the name out there, but there's a Google Plus blogger who's put out some really interesting stuff about Google Classroom, but also, for example, he talked about using Google Forms to form a database of information that your whole class can tap into. And so we're doing a research project, and I put that right into practice. I think that has been really good. And then, as Kevin mentioned, I just think that sort of the VT Ed on Twitter has been really good. And then also, I started following the Pew Research Center, the Pew, PEW. They have a bunch of data and statistics that you can sort of employ with your kids, how to read multimedia and visuals, and it just seems, pretty helpful. So we're using Twitter, quite a bit. And I'm subscribing to some of those newsletters, that cast.org. And I'm trying to think of a couple other resources. There's also the PLP Pathways Resources page. I've been populating that with some additional resources. And then finally, I just want to end with, the Middle Grades Institute. Their registration is open. That's happening June 24th. I think through the 28th more, is that correct? Or June 25th?
It's the 24th.
So the 24th. So if people are, considering good, actually great middle level education and professional development, I think that's a really, really good opportunity. And then as a literacy teacher, one other one is also the Vermont Reads Institute. Mm-hmm. If you're paying attention to some of their offerings, they have some great workshops around reading and literacy. And then also, as Allison mentioned, the AOE is putting out a lot of stuff. They're rebuilding their website right now, but if you start Googling around, you can find a bunch of material, not only on proficiency-based learning. They're developing a more robust set of information, but also about flexible pathways. And I think that as they build that up slowly, they're starting to create these like 1- and 2-page documents that are really helpful and that have really excellent links in there as well. So we have about 3 minutes left, and I just want to ask people, you know, you've talked about goals and PLPs. Sort of what's next on the horizon? I know people are trying to get to the February vacation, but what are people thinking about after the vacation, and what's your big challenge after vacation? And anybody feel free to answer.
I can jump in. My class is going to start doing a place-based unit around the Great Depression and the New Deal, looking specifically at the Civilian Conservation Corps and the impact it's had on Vermont. And so I'm hoping to get students up to Stowe on Mount Mansfield and look at some of the first trails that were built and talk about the Waterbury Reservoir and things that the students are using all the time and have no idea the connection to the history. And so I'm kind of excited to really do an investigation, inquiry-based, place-based unit with them after break.
Awesome. Allison?
Yes, we'll close this climate change technology unit reflection, and then hopefully use question formulation technique again to kind of go big picture astronomy. So we've zoomed in on like Earth systems, and now we're going to zoom back for solar system level, bigger than solar system level.
Awesome. Kevin?
We have two bigger team-based things coming up. First, we're going to be doing a big Rube Goldberg project with everybody where students work together to create a functioning machine of some sort with some steps in it. And then at the end of the year, every other year, we take our students to either Washington, D.C. or New York City, and this year's the D.C. year. So we're down there for 5 days, and students are starting their independent research projects around that right now. So we just had the kickoff actually on Tuesday. They're starting to figure out what their topic's going to be to study, and that's a whole process in itself to get prepared for that week.
Wow, those are some big fish to fry right there. So what we're doing is I've decided to do a complete negotiated curriculum unit, and I polled the kids, and the kids want to study World War II. So we're going to, I think we have our science fair coming up. I think that's the Friday after break. And then after that, we're just going to go straight to a negotiated curriculum. And we're going to start by asking the critical questions. And then I'm going to try and funnel a lot of the curriculum through their PLP, through questions about principles and values and communities. And then, you know, what goals do they have for their learning? And then producing evidence of those goals on their evidence page. And then also, they agreed. I asked them, I said, would you be willing to teach your fellow students a 20-minute lesson on whatever particular topic that you are interested in? And they said they would. So I think that might take us a couple months, actually, depending on, you know, how much time we have allocated for it, because as you guys know, the end of the year is really chopped up. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that we're doing is the day before Green Up Day is we're hosting a Green Team Expo, where we're going to have half the day. We're going to have workshops going on throughout the school about sustainability in the environment, organizing that. And that's going to be, I think, May 4th or May 5th. And so between the Green Team Expo and then a negotiated unit, and then finishing off the year, you know, there's still a long way to go, that's for sure. And we're going to try and get kids out in the community and kind of just exploring and experiencing, I guess, as we move forward. Anybody else have any last comments or thoughts?
I know we didn't bring it up yet. There's I think it's March 26th, a big SPL conference at St. Michael's College that's relatively affordable. I went to it last year. It's an awesome full day conference workshop.
That's March 26th?
It's either the 24th or 26th. I'm pretty sure it's the 26th.
Can you do me a favor, and can you just send me a link to that, and then I'll post that on PLP Pathways on the Twitter feed?
Yes, I can. It must be the 24th because the 26th is a Sunday.
Okay. All right. Well, again, I just really appreciate the commitment you guys have to being better at your craft and contributing to PLP Pathways. I'd like to thank the Middle Grades Collaborative and the Tarrant Institute for their sponsorship. You guys are doing really amazing work, and I really appreciate listening to you. And Have a great vacation. If I don't talk to you, I hope you guys have a wonderful vacation. And our next webinar, I believe, is the week of March, might be March 16th. Even I think that's our next webinar. So I'll see everybody then. And Maura, thank you very much for starting the call. I really appreciate it.
Of course, have a great evening, everyone.
All right, take care. Bye now.
Bye.